Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari. Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Banachari. Jamuna Tira Banachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yasodhanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yasodhanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Banachari. Yamuna Tira Banachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari. Jaya Muspa Paramahansa Paribhajaracha Jasthitare Smada Piridhanta Saraswati Goswami Bhagavad Ki Jai. Ananta Kodi Vaishnava Ki Jai. Ramacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktamani Ki Jai. Shri Radha Krishna Bhog Gopinath Sam Khand Radha Khand Giri Goldhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Guru Dwarka Dham Ki Jai. Swami Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to Jai Sundar. All glories to Jai Sundar. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Hare Krishna Mother, my humble obeisances. You're welcome for today's class. Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Nice to see you today on our platform to share your realizations and today's verse. The devotees will still join later on, maybe most of them always come late. So for those who are here, I will kindly introduce the speakers for today. We have today His Grace Partha Prabhu, his wife, Her Grace Uttama Prabhu, Uttama Devidasi. They are disciples of Srila Prabhupada and have been married since 1971. They are both members of the Grasta Vision team and are certified mentors with Vaishnava Vision version of 108, and prepare and enrich. They have facilitated seminars for the GVT, that is Grasta Vision team, all over the world, South Africa, England, India, Ireland, Brazil, Guyana, Trinidad, and US and Canada. They live presently in Saranagati village, British Columbia, Canada, where they offer premarital education via Skype. So I hope many Grastas will have a lot of questions to ask today, because we have their grace today to share with us their realization. Thank you, Mother. Thank you, Prabhu. So the Prabhupada have chanted Radha Madhava. We just share the screen, the verse on the screen, so we can start for today's class, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Naranam Namaskritam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatam Vyasam Tatodayam Udirayat Nasta Praeshu Abandreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloki Bhaktir Bhagavati Naishtaki.
So today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 9, Text 10. Krishnam Chatat Prabhavaga Asinam Jagadishvaram Hridistam Pujayam Asa Maya Yo Patavigraham Krishnam unto Lord Krishna. Cha also. Tat of him. Prabhavagya the knower of the glories Bhishma. Asinam sitting. Jagadishvaram the Lord of the universe. Hridistam situated in the heart. Pujayam asa worshipped. Mayaya by internal potency. Upata manifested. Vigraham a form. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada.
Jai.
Lord Sri Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, yet he manifests his transcendental form by his internal potency. This very Lord was sitting before Bhishma Dev, and since Bhishma Dev knew of his glories, he worshipped him duly. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The Lord's omnipotency is displayed by his simultaneous presence in every place. He is present always in his eternal abode, Goloka Vrindavan, and still he is present in everyone's heart and even within every invisible atom. When he manifests his eternal transcendental form in the material world, he does so by his internal potency. The external potency, or the material energy, has nothing to do with his eternal form. All these truths were known to Sri Bhishmadev, who worshipped him accordingly. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamaniti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvashesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tanane Omagana Timarandasya Jananjanan Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. Vanchakalpatarubhascha Kripasindhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, would you like to start, Uttama?
I'd like to begin by saying how wonderful it is to be back in South Africa again. We have visited long time ago, so it's wonderful to be with you all here again today. This is such a potent part of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We understand that Krishna, he teaches the world by teaching his devotees. So we see here that Krishna has appeared before Bhishma at the time of his deciding to leave this material world. And that's really the goal of all of us. So it's very heartening to witness this happening to the devotees. So we can understand that Krishna came here for many reasons. Krishna is known as expert. Whatever he does, he fulfills many purposes by doing just one thing. So we understand how Krishna was about to leave Hastinapur, and Maharaj Yudhisthira was just begging him to somehow or other relieve the guilt and the grief and the burden in his heart for having slain and been responsible for starting a war, so he thought, the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So Krishna agreed to stay a few more days and try to relieve that despondency in Yudhisthira's heart. But Krishna only did that externally. Internally, he actually didn't want Yudhisthira to be able to be fully satisfied with his instructions because he had another plan. So Yudhisthira had been listening to Krishna's reasons why he had wanted the battle of Kurukshetra to happen, and how Yudhisthira had done his duty, and Yudhisthira didn't need to lament. He had actually done the right thing. But still, he just somehow couldn't accept. And he had a very difficult time sleeping. So one of his restless nights when he couldn't sleep, he thought, well, let me just go and see Krishna. Just being around him makes me just feel so satisfied. So it was the night and everyone else was sleeping, but he thought maybe Krishna's awake. And he went and he peeked in his room, because Krishna's door was always open for Maharaj Yudhisthira. And he saw that Krishna was meditating. And he thought, this is the Supreme Lord upon whom all yogis meditate. So what could he be meditating on? And Krishna noticed that Yudhisthira came, and so he came back from his meditation, and he greeted Yudhisthira. And so Yudhisthira said, do you mind if I ask you something? Who are you meditating on? And he described that he had actually been meditating on Bhishma. He said, I am understanding that Bhishma constantly thinks of me within the core of his heart. So we see in the verse here how it's describing how this very Lord had been sitting, how Bhishma had been meditating on the Lord. This very Lord sitting before Bhishma, who was situated in everyone's heart, because Bhishma had been meditating his whole life on his worshipful deity, Lord Krishna. And Krishna was fully aware of that. And so he was reciprocating. And so that is when Krishna suggested to Yudhisthira that, I think we should go and we should go and visit Bhishma, and you should receive some instructions on how to manage the kingdom and perhaps get some relief for your grieving heart. So this is the part of the Bhagavatam we're on where Yudhisthira and his whole family, his priest Domya, many of the Pandavas, they all went from Hastinapur back to the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And Bhishma had been meditating on Krishna within the core of his heart the whole time. We see that when Bhishma had fallen in the battle, it was only the 10th day of the battle. And even though the battle raged on for another 8 days, Bhishma, even though he was in such a tumultuous circumstance, war raging all around him, he had just been meditating upon his worshipful Lord. And so we see here that Lord that he had been meditating on had now appeared before him. So one could wonder why it is that Bhishma was on the opposite side of the battle. And as I was saying, Krishna wanted to show many things. Every action he does, he shows many, many purposes. And so Bhishma, being one of the 12 Mahajans, or a Mahajano Yena Gatasa Panta, a person that we need to follow in our life and follow their example, he could understand, the inner desires of the Lord. That Krishna wanted to show so many teachings through this battle of Kurukshetra. And so we understand that Bhishma was somehow obliged to fight on the other side. But really, Bhishma, being such a great devotee, he could have just said, to heck with this. I'm going to go fight with Arjuna. That side is really where my heart is. But he knew that if the Pandavas had too much of an advantage, because Bhishma was at that time the most powerful Kshatriya on the planet. And really, he couldn't be defeated. So if he went on the side of the Pandavas, everybody would say, it was a very unfair advantage. And Krishna understood that because he also made a vow and a promise that he would not fight for the same reason. Because if he fought, of course the Pandavas are going to win. So Krishna didn't want any doubt in anyone's mind that Dharma was on the side of the Pandavas. And so Krishna wanted to show that no matter how great you are, even if you have been taught military science by Parashurama, like Bhishma had been, even though you have a boon from your father that you don't have to die unless you want to, still, if you take the side of adharma, it's not going to work. And Bhishma being such a surrendered soul and servitor of the Lord, was willing happily to take that position. And we also understand that Bhishma he's in a relationship with Krishna in two different rasas. He has his primary rasa of servitudeship, and he also has this secondary rasa of wanting to relate with the Lord in chivalry. So we understand from the descriptions in the Bhagavatam how when Bhishma Dev was meditating in his heart on Lord Krishna, he was constantly remembering that scene on the battlefield where he had, you see, another part is just to, is that Duryodhana had become very, very upset with Bhishma Dev because he knew he was the strongest. And somehow or other he hadn't even killed one of the Pandavas. And so there was this arrangement where there was these special arrows. And somehow or other, Arjuna got those special arrows, and Bhishma Dev could understand that, Krishna's playing some part here. So he didn't have those special arrows, but he made this vow to Duryodhana that if I don't kill Arjuna today, it's going to be because Krishna's going to break his promise. So I vow that if I can't make Krishna, that I will make Krishna break his promise, or I'm going to kill Arjuna. So Bhishma Dev was just feeling so grateful that he got to engage in that chivalrous rasa with Krishna. So when he is lying on the bed of arrows, he is meditating on just seeing that last glorious fight that he had, where he fought so strongly and so valiantly, shooting so many arrows at Krishna and Arjuna that the rest of the battlefield couldn't even see them. There's this cloud around Arjuna and Krishna, and Bhishma Dev just shooting so many arrows that practically they couldn't even be seen. And when Bhishma Dev was shooting those arrows at at Arjuna, some of them, of course, hit the charioteer. And because Krishna and Bhishma Dev are in the chivalrous rasa, Krishna is feeling the love that Bhishma Dev has being able to engage in this battle where Krishna is present. And so it's said that even though the arrows pierced Krishna's body and even drew a little bit of blood, Krishna was just feeling it like showers of flowers. So when Bhishma Dev was able to wound Arjuna so severely that he was on the ground, his chariot was broken, and he was about to die, Krishna had this promise. He had made Arjuna promise that Kontiya Pratijanahi, my devotee, will never be vanquished. So he wanted to fulfill this promise that Arjuna's my devotee, and there's no way that he can be vanquished. But there was a dilemma because Bhishma Dev had just made a promise that I'm going to kill Krishna, or Krishna's going to break his promise. Kill Arjuna. So Krishna, he wanted to fulfill the promise of Bhishma Dev. And he grabbed some wheel of a chariot because he was unarmed himself. He had made this vow that he wouldn't fight. So he had no personal weapons. So he grabbed this wheel. And Bhishma Dev is just constantly envisioning Krishna running towards him with his hair blowing, but it's all grayish because of the dust of the battlefield. And he's got this wheel in his hand and running towards him. And because he's in this chivalrous rasa, that was such a wonderful meditation for him. So we see here that Bhishma Dev is meditating on Krishna like this in the core of his heart. And that's also a teaching for us. I would just like to share with you this wonderful talk that Srila Prabhupada gave in 1974. He said, the Hare Krishna mantra chanting means keeping Krishna always within your heart. He said, it's not expensive at all. You haven't got to make a very exalted throne for Krishna. You can even imagine that in my heart I have placed a diamond throne and Krishna is sitting. That is accepted, and actually it becomes. It's not imagination. The throne actually becomes there in your heart. Even within the mind you think, I have kept one diamond throne, very costly throne. Because Krishna is coming, he will sit down here. That is not false, that is fact. So you create such a situation in your heart. Now Krishna has seated. Let me wash his feet with Ganges water or Jamuna water. Now I change his dress to first-class costly garments. Then I decorate Krishna with ornaments. Then I give him something for eating. You can simply think of this. This is meditation. It is such a nice thing. Anywhere you can sit down and think that Krishna is in your heart and you are receiving him in such a nice way. This is not false. This is fact, and this is easy. So here we see that Bhishma Dev is one of the Mahajans. He's showing us how it's very important to keep Krishna within our heart. And by keeping Krishna within our heart, we will understand that we also need to be guided by the Vaishnavas and the Brahmins, and that guidance will help us to keep the religious principles that we have vowed to take in our lives and with our initiations. And in this way, by keeping Krishna, his instructions, and his devotees in our heart, we can make progress, just as Bhishma Dev is showing us here. I'd like to share something.
And it's also amazing how Krishna reconciled that whole dilemma between his promise to Arjuna and in order to keep Bhishma's vow intact, that when he was charging towards grandfather Bhishma, and Bhishma Devi just folded his hands, and for him that was the perfection of his life, to see Krishna coming to defeat him and kill him and to protect his pure devotee Arjuna. And at that precise moment, the sun set and the conch shell blew to end the day's fighting. So Krishna kept his promise intact not to fight, and Bhishma was able to fulfill his promise to get Krishna to break his vow, and Krishna protected his devotees. So Krishna accomplishes many things by one pastime. So Supreme Lord is inconceivable. And Srila Prabhupada describes in the purport how Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's present everywhere, and even within the atom. And simultaneously he's present in the spiritual world, and how by his internal potency he can even manifest within this material world in his eternal transcendental form. And Prabhupada mentions that Grandfather Bhishma, he was fully aware of all these truths, and he could see that here is the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum, controller of the spiritual and material worlds, who is present everywhere, even within the atom, and he's fully present before me. So Grandfather Bhishma, he could realize those truths. And so that absolute truth is something we're all aspiring to know and understand. That what is the nature of Krishna? What is the nature of this material world? And what is the nature of the spiritual reality and our relationship with the Supreme Lord in that spiritual reality? And so we understand intellectually how Krishna is everywhere. He's within every atom. He's within the hearts of all living entities. And intellectually that's easy to understand, but practically it's not always so easy. I recall one time Srila Prabhupada was giving a lecture, I believe it was in maybe 1968, very early in the movement in New York. And Prabhupada was speaking on the verse where Krishna says, Bhumir apo nalo vayu kam modir kam eva cha hankara ityami bhima prakritir astada. That earth, air, fire, water, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego, these are my separated material energies. So Prabhupada was speaking on this, how Krishna is present everywhere within the atom, and all these energies within this material world are also Krishna's energies, and because they are his energies, they are non-different from him. So in this lecture, Srila Prabhupada said, he said, you're all sitting on this floor. They're in this temple and they're sitting on the floor. And Srila Prabhupada says, you are not sitting on a floor, you are sitting on Krishna. That actually you are sitting on Krishna's energy. And so you could see that Prabhupada was actually perceiving that. And so again, that's a very difficult platform to come to, something we cannot artificially imitate. But we have to try to understand. And Prabhupada made a very interesting statement in the purport of the Bhagavatam, how the only difference between the material realm and the spiritual realm was that the material realm is that portion of the Lord's creation where the all-pervasiveness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not perceived. So if you think about that deeply, the material world is where the all-pervasiveness of Krishna is not perceived. So we can see how someone like Srila Prabhupada, Mahajan Bhishma Dev, they perceived that Krishna was everywhere within everything, and that situated them within the spiritual world. Like we understand wherever a pure Vaishnava goes, he creates the atmosphere of Vrindavan because he is in Vrindavan. He perceives that all-pervasiveness of the Lord. And so the process of sadhana bhakti is meant to help us develop that consciousness to perceive this all-pervasiveness of the Lord. And so that process of sadhana bhakti, it involves chanting the holy name. And we understand from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by this process of Sankirtan, that the heart becomes cleansed. That the holy name cleanses all these misgivings and the dust that's covering the heart. And it's compared to cleansing a mirror. That a mirror might be so dirty you cannot even see your reflection. But as you begin cleaning the mirror, you begin to see yourself. And in the same way, as we begin chanting the holy name, gradually the heart becomes purified, and eventually we can see and understand our true self and the Supreme Self, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that process of chanting, it's extremely powerful. And so chanting Hare Krishna, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada described in one purport of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, he was talking about the efficacy of the holy name. And he said, just like in North America, there is a chain of hotels, and they're called Ramada Inn. So the name Rama is in there. So thousands of people are driving by these hotels, and they're seeing a sign that says Ramada Inn. And Prabhupada said they simply see that sign, Ramada Inn, and because the syllables Rama are in there, Prabhupada said, they become purified. Even though they're not intentionally thinking of Ram or Krishna, but indirectly, because they're seeing the name of Krishna, they become purified. And similarly, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada, he once said, simply someone touches the book, they become purified. Prabhupada was one time giving class, and I usually see many devotees are reluctant to try and chant the mantras in the class. So Prabhupada, he was encouraging devotees that you should try to chant these mantras. He said, even you do not understand the language of the mantra, he said, it's a sound vibration coming from the spiritual realm, and it's extremely purifying, and it's of great benefit to chant these mantras. And then Srila Prabhupada said, he said, even you don't understand the language of the mantra, you become purified. And then Srila Prabhupada said, if you're reading the Srimad Bhagavatam or hearing the Bhagavatam, he said, even you do not understand the English. He said, simply because you are attempting, you are trying to understand Krishna, you are trying to turn toward Krishna to the best of your ability. Prabhupada said, Krishna will take you back to Godhead. So there's so much power and potency in that, in the holy name. And so that helps us to develop that pure spiritual consciousness. And also we do, in our sadhana bhakti, we do devotional service, which also purifies the mind and senses. And along with the chanting and the seva are very important instructions to avoid the namaparad, the offenses against the holy name, because they are things that can impede us from accessing the holy name. So if we study a very wonderful book, Srila Prabhupada translated Sri Upanishad, there's a very nice verse there. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmani evan upashate sarvabhutasu chatmanam tato na vijagupsate. And so the verse says, one who sees the Supreme Lord everywhere and present within everyone never hates anything or any living entity. So one who actually fully imbibes Krishna consciousness, he has no animosity towards anyone. So we understand a pure Vaishnava, even if someone is attacking him, he thinks, oh, Krishna has sent this individual to help me take shelter of him. If some adversity comes, he thinks, oh, I'm actually deserving of so much more adversity, but Krishna's minimized it to nil, and he's putting this adversity before me to help me come closer to him. So someone who actually sees Krishna everywhere, within everything, he has no animosity towards anything, and he has no hatred or aversion to any situation because of that pure spiritual consciousness. So again, that's a very difficult platform to understand. And so that verse describes Atmani Evan Upashati. And Anupashati refers to following in the footsteps of the Acharyas, to see how the Acharyas, how these great Vaishnavas would act in their lives and behave. And by following in the footsteps of those Acharyas, that helps us to develop this spiritual consciousness. And so a very important aspect of our sadhana bhakti is to develop this consciousness that Krishna is everywhere, arranging everything, and understanding that the manifestation and the degree to which we actually understand Krishna consciousness, that's going to become very apparent in our behaviors, and especially in our behaviors with other living entities and in relationship to behaviors with those around us, whether you're in a brahmacharya ashram, brahmacharini ashram, grihastha ashram, vanaprastha ashram, sannyas ashram, that your behavior with others is going to be a manifestation of the development of your spiritual consciousness. And so in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains how Daiviyesha gunamaya mamamaya darachaya mamivaye prapadyante maya metantarante. That the modes of material nature are very difficult to overcome. But he says, one who surrenders unto me can easily cross beyond them. And in the 14th chapter, Krishna describes this, the modes of material nature and how they compete for supremacy. And Prabhupada describes in detail that we may be in the mode of goodness, and then passion and ignorance will try and dominate and put us into those lower modes. Sometimes we may be in a lower mode, and the mode of goodness helps us to elevate. And so these modes are continually pulling at us in different directions. And Srila Prabhupada describes in a purport in the 14th chapter that how by practice one can develop the mode of goodness and defeat passion and ignorance. So it's very important to understand that in relationship with sadhana bhakti, we are trying to situate ourselves in the mode of goodness, because the mode of goodness is a stepping stone to pure goodness, to Shuddha Sattva. And if we desire to associate with Krishna on the spiritual platform, in the spiritual realm, we have to attain a nature like his. So Krishna's nature is Shuddha Sattva, and when we can elevate ourselves to goodness and pure goodness, then we become qualified to actually enter into Krishna's nature. And so again, that's not easy. And if we think of this in terms of our behaviors with others, and my wife and I, we do a lot of marital education, helping grihastas to develop peaceful, stable, happy ashrams, and
in the mode of goodness.
In the mode of goodness, yeah. And a lot of what we do is developing a consciousness amongst grihastas that your grihastha ashram is a very important aspect of your spiritual life. It's important. It's an important ashram for practicing spiritual qualities. Just like Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he's telling us that if we want to develop attraction for the holy name, and we want to be able to chant the holy name of the Lord constantly, we need to become humble and patient and tolerant. And Grihastha Ashram is an excellent field of activities to practice that. I performed a wedding once, and Radhanath Maharaj spoke at the wedding. He gave a nice little talk to the couple, and he said the Grihastha Ashram, is the best ashram for making spiritual advancement. Because to be successful in the Grihastha Ashram, you have to be patient, tolerant, kind, compassionate. And he said those are the qualities you need to acquire to develop pure love of Krishna. So within the Grihastha Ashram, I'm sure many of the listeners here are married. We all know there's opportunities where we become impatient or a little intolerant or frustrated with our spouses. But actually those are opportunities for us to actually practice these qualities. And I think sometimes as aspiring Vaishnavas, we're thinking that if I chant Hare Krishna, one day Krishna is going to turn on some magic switch, and all of a sudden I'll be more tolerant than a tree, I'll be devoid of all sense of false prestige, and I'll be respectful to everyone. But my experience, at least, is it doesn't quite work that way. Is that my experience is Krishna gives you the opportunity to practice being patient and tolerant and respectful. And then by that practice, Krishna sees you making that endeavor, then he helps you to fully imbibe those qualities. And it's also very important to understand that we are performing bhakti yoga. And Prabhupada described that in all forms of yoga, whether it's bhakti yoga, ashtanga yoga, jnana yoga, all these forms of yoga, there has to be some discipline of the mind. We have to control the mind. And as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, how the mind can be the friend and it can be the enemy. and how one who can control his mind can be the best of friends. And because of our material conditioning, and because we don't really understand the all-pervasiveness of Krishna, we tend to be in situations where we're a little provoked, we tend to be very reactive. And that is the nature of, I hate to say it, actually animal life. Animals are very reactive. We were in South Africa maybe 15 years ago, and Devotee Krishnadas took us to this big wildlife park. And there's all these signs that say, do not run, do not run. Because if you run, the lion will immediately run towards you. They'll think you're some kind of prey. Or just like a kitten, you have a little small cat, you have a little string with a ribbon on the end. You just pull it quickly, and that kitten is going to jump on it. This is reactive. So that's the nature of the material world. And actually, a couple of months before, in that lion park, some Japanese tourist got out of his car to take some pictures, and was end of story. Tried to run away from the lion. So we don't want to be reactive, but we tend to do. Our spouse or some friend says something that's a little annoying or slightly disturbs us, and we just become reactive, and we tend to respond in the same mood. But in the human form of life, between when, if on this side of the scale is the stimulus, and I'm over here, some stimulus, and I can just react according to the modes of material nature to which we are totally conditioned. Or if we can understand that between the stimulus and when we respond, there's a little gap in time there, which we've been blessed with in the human form of life, in which we can decide how we're going to respond. So someone may say something irritating to you, something offensive. They may criticize you. So you can just become reactive and you can criticize them back. You're responding in the same modes of passion and ignorance. Or when someone criticizes you, you can take advantage of that small space and practice the yoga of controlling the mind. And you can think, well, how can I respond to this? Not also in the modes of passion like this person is. How can I try and elevate them to the mode of goodness? So you could say something like, oh, I see you're very disturbed. Is there some way that I maybe offended you? There's something I can help you with. And you can completely change the dynamic of that interaction. So yoga can be practiced in all fields of life. Like Krishna says, in all activities, think of me, become my devotee. And so in all our ashrams, in all our activities, we can be thinking, how can I practically apply the philosophy of Krishna consciousness? So Krishna is everywhere. He's all-pervasive within our hearts. So if we realize that, we would automatically be in the mode of Shuddha Sattva. It would be completely spontaneous. So from one point of view, we become Krishna conscious, we'll be elevated to goodness and Shuddha Sattva. And from the other side of the coin, if we practice the behaviors of goodness and the behaviors of Shuddha Sattva by practice, that will facilitate us in realizing that Krishna is everywhere. Krishna will be pleased to manifest. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada described that how if we cleanse our heart and make it a very pleasing sitting place, Krishna will come and sit within the lotus of our hearts. But if our hearts are filled with animosity and frustration and dissatisfaction and resentment and contempt and anger, Krishna is actually there. But you can imagine it's probably not the most pleasing place that he would like to be. He would like to be with the gopis in Vrindavan, not in a heart that's filled with malice and anger and frustration. So the practice of yoga involves us cleansing our heart through chanting the holy name, reading the Shastra, and also developing these activities that are in the mode of goodness. So recently we were working with one couple, they were both IT engineers, about how there's simple behaviors that you can practice which help to improve the quality of your interactions, that you can turn conflict into something which is very undesirable and very frustrating, and most people either want to avoid or they totally explode. That how you can turn conflict into a non-confrontational, constructive dialogue. It's actually possible by practicing activities and consciousness in the mode of goodness and certain defined behaviors. It's actually not that difficult if you practice it. So at the end of the session, we asked the couple, what was their take-home from this session? And the gentleman said, I think I need to do some internal engineering. And as our god sister, she was actually talking about developing humility, and she was describing how when we take birth within this material world, we have been programmed with anti-humility software. Like sometimes your computer gets infected with a virus and it does not work properly. So she was saying how in this material world, it's very difficult for us to be humble and tolerant and patient because we have this false ego is literally programmed in our consciousness. And so we do have to reprogram ourselves by chanting Hare Krishna, reading the Shastra, and practicing consciously activities in the mode of goodness, because those will help us to realize that Krishna is manifest everywhere. And often it's experienced that as aspiring Vaishnavas, we're in the temple and we treat everyone with the greatest respect and compassion and kindness. And then we may go home to our ashrams, whether it's Grihastha or Brahmacharya or Brahmacharini, and the doors close, and then sometimes we become a different beast. We maybe say things that aren't so respectful, not so kind. So why is there this disconnect? So Krishna consciousness means to connect with Krishna always. Krishna is within the temple, but he's also within our hearts. He's within our home. We all may have deities in the home. We may even have a little picture within our home of Krishna. And that picture is actually non-different than the Lord. I can share with you an interesting story about the potency of a picture. In I think it was 75 or 76, one of my godbrothers went to Mayapur for the Mayapur festival, and he took a picture. There was a large painting that was done on the wall of the Mayapur complex, on the outside wall. Beautiful picture of Panchatattva. He took a photograph, and when he got back, he gave me the negative, and I thought, well, I will take this image and get a photograph made. It was 8 by 10 inches, and I was going to frame it. I was hit Bajari, and I was going to put it on the altar. So I had the picture, and I went to a shop, and I picked out a very nice frame. The whole thing would have been maybe 11 by 14 inches, the size. And the lady at the counter said, it'll be ready in 2 weeks. We'll give you a call. 2 weeks later, I get the phone call. So I go to the shop, and I give them my ticket, and I say, I got the phone call, the picture is ready, so I'd like to pick it up. And the lady at the counter, she went in the back, and it took her a long time. Maybe 5 minutes later, she came out and she said, I'm sorry, I can't find it. And I said, well, I got a phone call and they said it was ready. So she went again and looked. And again, 5 minutes later, she came out embarrassed and frustrated. She said, I just can't find it. She said, the man who framed the picture is not here. And she said, I'm going to phone him and ask him what happened. So she gets on the phone, she goes in the back of the store, and she comes out with this parcel that was, it was probably 3 feet wide, 3 feet high, and a foot thick. And I said, well, that can't be the box because it's only like about, 11 by 14. Maybe the package would be like a fifth of that size. And she said, no, she told me that was it. So I said, let's open it up. And so she opened the package, and there's brown paper, and then there's cardboard, and then there's foam rubber. And inside all this packaging, there was the beautiful picture of Panchatattva. And the lady said to me that this man who had framed this picture, who was a devotee who knew nothing about Krishna, he realized this picture was something extremely valuable and extremely sacred. And she told me, I've been working here for 15 years, and I have never seen him wrap anything like this. So here's some ordinary person, no connection with Krishna, but he was just doing some seva by making this picture into a nice frame that was going to go on the altar in the Vancouver temple. And somehow Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu manifest his potency to that man. So all of us, we have Krishna in our homes. And the more we can realize that, the more that can help us to realize that, well, Krishna in our home, we have to work together and cooperate together peacefully and constructively for the satisfaction of our household deity. Whether it's Gaur Nitai, Radha Krishna, or even simply a picture. Krishna is within your home. And by doing that, then you realize that Krishna is all-pervasiveness. He is everywhere. He is within our home. And again, it's not easy, and it takes practice. Just like our one student said, I have to do some internal engineering. But you realize what the goal is, to learn to treat each other with love, respect, compassion, and kindness. And in that way, you actually manifest the quality of one who realizes the presence of Krishna everywhere. So Srila Prabhupada used to say that Krishna consciousness, it's actually a science. And it's something he wanted devotees to learn. And the statement of purpose that Srila Prabhupada wrote when he formed ISKCON, he described his first purpose was through, he desired that through a systematic process of education, that he how did he word it?
Values.
That by a systematic process of education, the imbalance of values in society could be taught to create the imbalance of values in society. And to correct the imbalance of values in society. So I see they're scrolling through a website there. If you actually look, there's on that website, there's the 12 principles and values of the Krishna conscious Grihastha life. So those values, that if we understand these values that Srila Prabhupada taught, they help us to have this framework of what actual spiritual behavior and consciousness is. And that can greatly assist us in molding our activities in such a way that are very conducive to developing Krishna consciousness. Now, they have them here now. If you want to can you scroll up on that?
He does.
Yeah. So here they are: alignment with Srila Prabhupada, spiritual growth and progress, spiritual equality and material difference, positive and realistic vision, mutual respect and appreciation, commitment, dedication, open and honest communication, personal and social responsibility, economic development and prosperity, focus on children's welfare, family love and affection, and regulated, balanced, and exemplary lifestyle. So if you go on the website, you can click on each of those items, and it'll give you a little more expanded explanation of those. And I just tell you how we developed these 12 principles. When our group formed about 16, 17 years ago, we looked at all the challenges faced by Grihasthas. What's separating them from Krishna? What's separating them from each other? What's the cause of their difficulties? What didn't they understand? What was misunderstood? What inappropriate paradigms were they exposed to, either within ISKCON or outside of ISKCON? And we looked at all those challenges, and try to discern what were the principles and values of Srila Prabhupada's teachings that were not properly understood or misrepresented that may have caused those problems, and what were the principles and values that, if we're taught, would also prevent them from happening in the first place. So from all those different problems that were categorized, we developed these 12 principles and values. And so those 12 principles and values, again, by imbibing them, they can help you to develop the spiritual consciousness within your ashram, and to actually understand that Krishna is within your home, within your heart, within the heart of your spouse, everywhere. And it can greatly assist you in developing a healthy Krishna conscious Grihastha ashram. And interestingly, there may be some brahmacharis listening, or brahmacharinis. We've given courses on these principles and some of the skills we teach, and had brahmacharis in the ashram and attending the course, even though they weren't married. And at different occasions, we had brahmacharis tell us that, well, just by understanding these principles and some of these skills of conflict resolution and communication, they said we get along so much better now in the brahmachari ashram. So the principles are universally applicable to all ashrams. So Krishna is everywhere. He's present within our hearts, and we can understand how Bhishma Dev was so fortunate that in his final moments the Supreme Lord was sitting before him, and that's something we all aspire for. And we should know that will come if we can imbibe Krishna consciousness. So I'd invite everyone to please explore the resources of the Grihastha Vision Team. I think there's many things there you may be able to take advantage of to help you in your ashram. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance and your kindness in being with us. So if anyone has any questions now, we could take some questions.
I actually have a little reflection on what you said. You know, you were describing about how we have that little gap where we can try to ascertain how to respond. And I was just thinking how when we make advancement in Krishna consciousness and we actually apply the values and the principles, that really widens that gap. That the spiritual advancement widens the gap so that we can respond spiritually to situations where in our conditioned state we would have reacted according to our conditioning. So it really helps us to be able to apply spiritual. It's the test and how we apply the spiritual advancement in our life. And I was reading yesterday that someone said something to Prabhupada about cleanliness is next to godliness. And Prabhupada said, no, cleanliness is godliness. So it's not that we practice them, and then we actually become in the Sudasattva platform. So those things become spiritualized by proper application of Krishna consciousness. So that's kind of what came to my mind when you were saying that. All right, back to you.
Thank you so much for your nice class. So many questions coming in. I will have one question based on the Grihasthas. You mentioned that you help Grihasthas make their marriage to be the mode of goodness. So my question is it not actually contrary to our preaching, which is a Grihastha should leave home and take Vanaprastha and take sannyas? When home is in the mode of goodness, how will he take Vanaprastha or sannyas?
So I'm hearing that person is saying we should make our Grihastha ashram the worst it can be so that we can just... What?
Because Srila Prabhupada left home after his wife used his Bhagavatam to drink a cup of tea. So he became miserable, so he left home. So if Grihastha is so peaceful, how will one leave home?
Srila Prabhupada described once there's two type of men that take sannyas. He said there's one that takes sannyas after a life of material frustration. And he said the second type is he's situated in Krishna consciousness in his ashram, in his grihastha ashram. He's in Narottam. And for him if he enters the sannyas ashram, it's just this very easy transformation. And Prabhupada said taking sannyas after a life of material frustration may be a stepping stone to a higher platform. But he said the real thing is to be dependent upon Krishna within his ashram. So that is the most important thing, that you have to be dependent on Krishna in your ashram. And if you cannot be Krishna conscious in your grihastha ashram, it's going to be a challenge also in sannyas. And I don't think, when we hear Srila Prabhupada's description of his grihastha life, I don't think we really understand what Prabhupada's grihastha ashram was like, because Prabhupada was actually very preaching actively, and although it appears there was some frustration, but we can understand that Srila Prabhupada was in a transcendental position throughout his entire life, and we can't really compare ourselves to that position.
And Srila Prabhupada acted very kindly, dutifully. His wife also took initiation. I think we have to take it that this was put there just to spur him for, preaching Krishna consciousness.
Yeah, it's not mainly on Prabhupada, but his teachings of Prabhupada, he always sometimes speak about the home is a dark well of material existence.
Mm-hmm.
That one who should practice detachment from husband and wife and be able to leave home at some age, 50 years old. Then my question comes, you have been married since 1971. What is the secret that your marriage is so long duration? Why many grihasthas are separating?
Two things. First, going to the example of the deep, dark well, Srila Prabhupada is referring to materialistic grihamedi life. So that is a deep, dark well. Grihastha ashram, Prabhupada, he said once, an ashram means a factory for producing devotion. So if we utilize our grihastha ashram for producing devotion, then it does actually become an ashram. We may be grihasthas with tilak and neck beads, but if we don't really cultivate Krishna consciousness and spiritual qualities, then even we may enter into a deep, dark well consciousness. But it's very important we understand that we have to cultivate spiritual life within our ashram. And if you also ask, well, why are we seem to be stable in our marriage? We've just celebrated our 50th anniversary last month, and I would say it's because we saw our marriage as a sacred duty to Srila Prabhupada and Lord Krishna. That Prabhupada wrote once that he wanted grihasthas to become examples for others. Actually, in the letter Srila Prabhupada, I don't know what was going on at that time. I can only imagine there was probably a lot of divorces occurring. And Srila Prabhupada said, we need many examples of sane grihasthas in the Krishna consciousness movement. So Prabhupada actually desired that stability be there. And so we hear about the deep dark well, we hear about everyone should take sannyas. And I'll tell you something very interesting. I have always been fascinated by the contradictory statements within our Shastra and even Srila Prabhupada's purports and instructions. In one place, Srila Prabhupada stated, after the age of 50, every man must take sannyas. In another place, he said, in the age of Kali Yuga, no one should take sannyas. So those two statements are both in Srimad Bhagavatam. They're in the same canto, the same volume, the same chapter, the same purport, the same paragraph.
Yes.
So how do you reconcile that? So Srila Prabhupada, he says, if one is qualified, if it's his nature, then one can take sannyas. So my understanding of reading Shastra and applying Shastra, sometimes we're looking for an easy way out. Or we're looking to criticize others. So a lot of times we study Shastra to criticize others, so it makes us look more advanced. But in the second verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it describes that this knowledge is only understandable by those who are pure in heart, and it's for the welfare of all. So when we understand, or we're looking at the different statements of Scripture, we have to look within and make sure my motive is pure, that I want to serve Krishna sincerely, I want to advance, and I want to help others advance. And then we will be able to find the proper application of those different statements. If our motivation isn't completely pure and we're not thinking of the welfare of others and our own welfare in a pure way, we're going to misunderstand and misapply. And an example of that is very early in our movement. There was a lot of very negative preaching about the Grihastha ashram, that the Grihastha ashram is a deep dark well. It's some kind of inferior ashram. And that was almost like a subtle form of emotional abuse. Because if someone is exposed to that negative paradigm that, well, even in Krishna consciousness, household life, you're fallen, it's a deep dark well, even you may not believe it, those things subtly impact you because you think, well, this person has some seeming spiritual authority and he's saying things, and they sit within your consciousness. And for anyone who's the Grihastha, you know that there are difficult times, there's challenges that you face. And in those times of challenge and adversity, you may recall those negative paradigms that you heard about Grihastha life being a deep dark well, and you may think, yeah, it feels like a deep dark well. So it's a deep dark well, so why should I bother working on my marriage, my family? It's all just Maya, I'll just be miserable until I can take sannyas. And that's the result of negative paradigms. But the healthy paradigm is the Grihastha ashram. It's an ashram for spiritual advancement. It's an extremely important spiritual responsibility for the success of Srila Prabhupada's society, for the health and welfare of your family, your spouse, your community, your nation. So it's very important to see those things in the proper perspective.
I also see that we have a very shallow understanding of what detachment means. And many devotees are very conflicted about what detachment means. I think for many people, it's just a material situation, where detachment actually has nothing to do with whatever situation you're in. It's understanding that the result is up to Krishna. That's what detachment means. We're detached from the results. So we try to raise our children in Krishna consciousness. We try the best that we can. They have their own free will. They may have their learning periods where they have to experiment with other things, but we do our best. So detachment doesn't mean to throw it away and give it up. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta says, that's the stupidest idea I ever heard of. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta commented, and he says, if one has something that helps one progress in Krishna consciousness, and one throws it away, he's a fool. So we have to actually understand how we're advancing. And our personal experience is that many people make huge advancement in the Grihastha ashram because they have to learn how to completely depend upon Krishna, and they have to use everything in Krishna's service. And also, we have such an opportunity to purify that tendency to react. Because when you're with someone who's very close to you and they say something which triggers some buttons in you or some anarta, it hits way harder than the person on the street saying it. So it's going to hit your anarta way harder, and you're going to have to stop, widen that gap, not just react according to your conditioning from this life, your childhood, your previous lives, whatever. And you're going to have to see, I'm with this devotee, or even if my partner's not a devotee, I'm with this person for some reason. Krishna wants me to learn something here. And I need to take advantage and see what it is I have to learn and how to respond compassionately. Not in all about me, you hurt me. What are you saying that to me for? You must have a need. How can I help you? What's the problem here? What do we need to learn? And so you get so much opportunity to learn that lesson in the Grahastha ashram. And if you're successful, you're going to make a great sannyasi. Or maybe you'll continue on to make a great Grahastha for the rest of your life and inspire your grandkids and whatever. Because we all are individuals. We all have different propensities, different situations are going to be better for one person, better for another. It's not a one, medicine cures every disease. So, yes, we want to get to that platform, to that consciousness in our life where we have that degree of detachment and that renunciation like a sannyasi has. Whether we're in the sannyasi garb or I'm a woman staying home with my grandkids, for protection, I still have to have that consciousness within my mind. And that's what we have to attain. So we see Bhishma Dev, he's on the battlefield. He's still completely focused. He's, on a bed of arrows, battle raging around him. He's still thinking of Krishna. That's where we have to go.
Thank you, Mother. Thank you so much. Our next question is from Sahadev Prabhu. Sahadev, please, 1 minute.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the class. And may I know which state you are in?
We're in Canada. We have provinces. So we're in British Columbia.
Oh, you're in Canada. I thought you were in the States. Okay. All right. My question has to do with some of us, particularly myself, I find this chapter very difficult to follow because we are encouraged to follow, not to imitate. And I do not see how to follow the activities of Bhishma Dev. Because you rightly said that Bhishma Dev, was constantly meditating on Krishna internally. Yet externally, he was acting contrary to a Krishna Bhakta. So how and what do we learn from such activities, such behavior of Bhishma Dev? Hare Krishna.
It appears, his activities appear contradictory to Vaishnava Seva, but we can understand on the platform if Dharma is executed purely by a Vaishnava. We can see how Grandfather Bhishma, his being on the opposite side, was actually a part of Krishna's pastime.
In his consciousness.
And his consciousness is fixed on Krishna. So by his acting according to his duty and his faith and devotion to Krishna, although it externally appeared as contradictory to Krishna's will, it was actually a part of Krishna's will. And even Arjuna, he's a pure devotee, a self-realized soul, but by Krishna's will, he became temporarily illusioned and decided not to fight. in the battle of Kurukshetra, and that enabled the pastime to evolve where Krishna spoke, Bhagavad Gita. So it's described that no one can understand the activities and the mind of the Lord or his pure devotees. It's very difficult to understand.
But it's described that Bhishma Dev could actually understand Krishna's need. And so he was able to choose the right action. So I don't think that he really acted contrary to a bhakta. He fought where he was obliged to fight, but his mentality didn't change. He still was favorable to the Pandavas. He knew their side was wrong. He knew the other side was right. He knew where religion was. He's just stuck in this circumstance. So I think from that, we have to learn that we can be in all sorts of circumstances, and they're just external. But our consciousness has to be in the right place. So that's how I think that we have to apply it. Because, I don't know if you have to go to an ordinary job, but, you don't feel like you're, I should be in the temple. I shouldn't be in this factory or this, office or the whatever. But you can make spiritual advancement there.
Thank you, Mother. I have another question. Because of your lecture, you give example of when Prabhupada said you are sitting on Krishna when they sit on the ground. And you mentioned that all energies are Krishna. So my question is, if all energies are Krishna, everything is from Krishna, why are we told not to use some of these energies in our material life? Why do we have do's and don'ts when everything comes from Krishna?
Because some of those things are detrimental
To
remembering Krishna. So water is Krishna's energy, and fruit is Krishna's energy, and rice is Krishna's energy. So you can make wine out of water and rice. When we got initiated, the day we got initiated, Srila Prabhupada gave Bhagavatam class, and he was giving a class on the verse about the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, and the verse is describing how they became intoxicated
on rice wine.
And in the class, in the purport, in the lecture, Srila Prabhupada said, and they became intoxicated on this wine, and Prabhupada said, you can make a very nice wine out of rice by fermenting rice.
So I was thinking, okay, after this lecture, we're just going to vow we don't take intoxications. Prabhupada's talking about making nice wine, But Prabhupada wasn't saying we're supposed to drink it. In fact, it was it was showing the example that it wasn't beneficial, because they all were not able to ascertain proper behavior because of the influence of the negative things. So I think that sometimes there are don'ts, because those don'ts tend to cloud our consciousness so that we can't ascertain what is right and what is wrong. And so we want to choose the favorable circumstances where we're most likely to be able to remember Krishna. And that's why there's the do's and the don'ts.
Thank you. If nobody has any other question, I have another question. In the course of your lecture, you mentioned where Krishna said, my devotee will never be vanquished. So presently in the material world, there seems situations where devotee seems to be vanquished. But Krishna promised my devotee will never be vanquished. So how do we collaborate this?
Srila Prabhupada was asked that question one time. How Krishna says he'll protect his devotee, the devotee will never be vanquished. And this person said, but I see that devotees, they're sometimes dying.
Getting sick and dying. Yeah.
And Prabhupada replied in a very strong voice. He said, they are not dying, they are going back to Godhead.
Philosophy. Is it a philosophy?
So, we aren't...
I read into something very recently. One of our God brothers was sannyas who left the movement, and he became quite ill. And in his final hours in this world, a doctor had told us to the devotees that he was in the hospital in bed, and this devotee sat up and said, "Prabhupada, you've come." And then he lied down and left his body.
I heard that story. Beautiful.
Yes. Someone just posted it recently, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was,
So I don't think we can make that decision that the devotee's been vanquished. We have no idea what's going on.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Sadev Prabhu.
Well, Hare Krishna. Well, I'm a grihasta, so I have a grihasta question. Usually, whoever visits my little cubicle here finds Krishna picture everywhere. I have Krishna picture everywhere. But I do not have Krishna picture in my bedroom and in my bathroom. For the reason that these are two places where like it's kind of private room. You understand what I mean? So my question is it appropriate for devotees to have Krishna picture in the bedroom and in the bathroom? I'm just trying to find out if it is appropriate for me to have them in my bedroom, so that in case there is a problem, I can just raise up my head to Krishna and say, "Krishna, help me." That's my question.
I could answer that by, I heard the story once of one of our, I can't remember which one of the 6 Goswamis it was. He was wearing a shalagram all the time around his neck. And sometimes when a call of nature would come, he would go and answer the call of nature, but he wouldn't remove the shalagram. And someone asked him, "Isn't that an offense?" And so he asked this person who asked that question, "Go ask the king, when you're riding your horse and the horse passes stool, do you get off the horse?" Well, the horse passes stool. And so this person went to the king and said, "Well, King Maharaj, when you're riding the horse and the horse passes stool, do you get off the horse?" He said, "No." So this just Acharya said, so therefore, when he wears the shalagram, when he goes to answer the call of nature, he leaves it on. He's like the horse of Krishna. So, but in the bedroom and bathroom, probably best not to have Krishna.
It's more respectful because we see that, we want to offer our respect to Krishna. This Goswami is, so advanced that Krishna's with him everywhere, and Krishna should be with us everywhere. I would say, though, if, because usually, in our bedrooms we change, and that's kind of why we're respectful. We don't, keep the picture there. I would say, if you're about to die and you're, passing away and you're in your bed, bring in all the pictures, So I think we have to, just use our intelligence on how to stay respectful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the purport, I think the last but one sentence, Srila Prabhupada was emphasizing on how Sri Krishna, his eternal, it says, okay, the external potency or the material energy has nothing to do with his eternal form. And I'm wondering, this external or material energy is still part of Krishna. It's Krishna's energy. So how does that not become part of his eternal form? Since Krishna is eternal in all circumstances, the energies should be eternal also. But here it is said that the material and external energies are not part of his eternal form.
In a highest sense, the external energy and the internal energy are the same. In the sense there's Krishna's energy, and as Prabhupada mentioned that the material creation, the material energy, is that portion of the creation where we cannot perceive the Lord's connection or his all-pervasiveness. So that external energy, in one sense, is non-different, but we also understand how the external energy, sometimes it's manifest and sometimes it's unmanifest, whereas that eternal spiritual realm, that is eternal manifest energy. So in the highest in one platform, it's non-different, and another platform, according to our consciousness, it is different.
And this specific line is referring to the personality of Godhead present before Bhishmadev. He's not a material body. It's completely, Krishna, who is a 100% transcendental form that is manifested by Krishna's own internal potency. So part of this explanation for that sentence is, I know you're taking it in a different direction and asking another question. I'm just saying that Bhishmadev is thoroughly understanding that Krishna is 100% spiritual.
I didn't mention in the class, but when I was preparing for class, I was thinking of one other amazing thing about Krishna, how he's present absolutely everywhere except in my consciousness. It's amazing.
What you just said brings me to the question I had here, that the sun is so pure that nothing can really contaminate the sun. And Krishna is much purer than the sun. So how then that Krishna refuses to enter into places where he considers contaminated? Like my heart is contaminated, so Krishna is reluctant to sit in my heart, but I would want him to sit in my heart. Why Krishna does that?
Well, it's like Prabhupada said, the sun doesn't discriminate. The sun shines its rays everywhere. But he described there's some places that are averse to the sun, like the caves. So I think we all have a little bit of that cave mentality, that we're not quite ready to fully embrace Krishna. And I think we don't actually realize that Krishna is before us. One devotee was telling me something interesting, that he mentioned that one of the last anartas is to not realize that Krishna is present before you, that to have some doubt that Krishna's some doubt that Krishna won't be present before you, or is not, that you're seeing something, but you have some doubt that it's actually Krishna. Yeah.
I thought the doubt.
Thank you. I have one more question on you. When you answer the question, my first question about deep dark well, and you mentioned in the beginning of our movement, there was this negativity about Grihastha ashrams. And that is true. It affected so many people in West Africa, in Africa as well. And we lost so many devotees who were emotionally, as you say, emotionally abused through those statements. So my question now is, how do we recover or bring back those people who left due to such words? If you get married, you're a fallen soul, you're not a good devotee in good standing. If you don't live in the temple, you are fallen, you're not a good devotee. So how do we pay back or rectify such offenses? Because the offenses of professional etiquette is also, we shouldn't make anybody lose taste of devotional service. And such statements frustrate so many people when they left the movements. So we who commit such apparats and kick somebody out of the movement through our actions or words, how do we pay back those offenses?
I know one of my godbrothers who used to, he was brahmachari, took sannyas, and pretty much everyone that was a brahmachari had that kind of hardcore preaching mentality about grihastas. And he actually apologized to all the grihastas that he knew. He said, what I said was wrong. Yes, had the humility to go to grahastas, and when he was in assemblies, he would say, what I was saying was wrong. We were doing a seminar in a temple in Italy. Pardon?
Don't have to say where.
And we were talking about the adverse effects of negative paradigms, and it was a part of the seminar. And at the end of the seminar, the curtains were closed, and someone had been changing the deities, and this brahmachari came off the altar, and he said, "I need to buy your book. I really
I'm preaching all wrong here."
Yeah.
Yeah,
So when,
if we've done that kind of preaching, it's important. We do apologize, and if at present we hear that kind of preaching, if we're in a position, we should try and say something to correct it.
yeah, because in the early days of Krishna consciousness, like 20, 30 years ago, when you join the movement, you will be told to renounce your businesses, renounce your family, even your parents. You don't visit them, they are Maya. So such words frustrate so many people. How can we ever correct such things? When somebody has abandoned his parents or left his businesses, or is a banker, he resigned from banking jobs, and later in the 10, 20 years after, the movement also kick him out. So how do we rectify such mistakes?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't go back in time, but we can pray within our hearts to get the right vision and to act on the right vision, and pray very sincerely that Krishna can go in their hearts and help them. And to make a nice atmosphere in our temples where people will feel welcomed. That's within our power.
So those people in the early days in America, in London, Africa, everywhere, they were preaching like that. Which book were they reading to preach such philosophy?
Which what?
Sorry, we couldn't hear you.
Which book were they reading to be preaching negatively?
It's funny. It's funny because we give seminars to we read Bhagavad Gita. We read Bhagavad Gita with youth, like 15 to 20. And, we're reading through third or fourth chapter where Prabhupada's talking, about what renunciation is and what a sannyasi is. And the kid said, "Did you guys have different books back then or what?" I mean, Prabhupada doesn't say that here. The kid's figuring it out, right? He says, "What were they reading?"
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I was just thinking yesterday about an idea for like a seminar. We say Shastra yes, that Shastra Chakshus, that we have to see through the eyes of Scripture. It's just that these glasses that I read the Scripture with are highly conditioned. And some people have like those Coke bottle glasses, they're really conditioned. And so when they're reading the Scripture, they're reading it with their conditioned vision. And I think we all need to be really aware of that we have this conditioning and we're not really hearing what Srila Prabhupada's saying. And that's why it's so important to have mentors and to have older devotees. Back those days, there was no grandmas. They said, don't be dumb, So, we really have to be aware that we're reading Shastra with Coke bottle glasses, lenses. Really warping the vision.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may ask one more question.
Yeah.
I realize that in our culture as Vaishnavas, almost always the man sits to the right and the lady sits to the left-hand side, like the way you two are sitting now. Prabhuji is on the right, Mataji is on the left, the same as Krishna. Krishna is standing on the right, Radha is standing on the left, Ram, Sita, same thing. So may I know why that is the case? Why the man always has to be on the right, the woman has to be on the left side? And before you
Because
answer,
you keep the respectable person to the right. So he's more respectable than me. So in my eyes, I think it's just, it's Vedic etiquette.
I think Prabhuji might say the same thing to you too, that you are his respectable half.
It's not
Because that's the Vaishnava vision.
Yeah.
Tell your bhakti siddhanta go.
actually.
Interesting. There's an article from the Harmonist. It's attributed to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he's talking about marriage. And he says, in looking for a spouse, both a man and a woman should only accept someone whom they see as a better servant of Krishna than themselves. That sounds impossible. But what it means is there has to be mutual humility. And it says neither has any right or sense of proprietorship over the service or the property of the other. Neither can demand service from the other. Neither can impose their service on the other. And it goes on, and it concludes by saying that this understanding of Vaishnava marriage has its origin in the worship of the household deity. So we understand that Sri Sri Gaurnitai, they're the boss of our house. And we try to please them to get together.
Even I wanted to say one comment on what Sadev is saying. Even in Africa, a man always sits by the right hand side of the wife, even during wedding days. And Africa is not Vedic, it's tradition. My father said a man has to stay on the right hand side of the wife. So if enemy come, he can use right hand and defend his wife.
Yeah, see?
There you go.
So it's not Vedic, it's also everywhere.
And really, Vedic truths are applicable at the core everywhere.
Yes.
Some things are culturally, and some things we have to understand the cultural reason needs to have a sound philosophical eternal truth. Otherwise, it might just be some ritual. Like Prabhupada would give the example about in the wedding, there was always a cat under the basket. So that's not one of those eternal rituals, It's just, one day grandma had to stop the cat from running around, so she put the basket over it. It's not the eternal part of a wedding that you keep a cat under a basket. So Prabhupada said we're supposed to ascertain if the ritual will make us spiritual or if it's just some temporary,
Yeah, for African, it's not spiritual, it's just tradition. Because my elder brother was getting married, then they sit opposites. My father said, no. You sit right hand side, always ready to defend your wife. If you sit here, enemy attack her, you can't do anything. So that was just tradition.
Yeah, because women feel very protected that way, when they know that their husband will protect them.
Well,
Thank
you
you so
two
much.
are very, very exemplary and so sweet. We would like to have you more and more. Please, when we do invite you to come to our forum, please try your best to come here to bless us with your association.
We'd love to come someday. Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Maharaj. Thank you so much. So we ask all devotees to unmute yourselves and let's chant Hare Krishna for Prabhu and Mataji for coming today.
Hare Krishna, Hare
Hare
Krishna,
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 Hare
Hare
Hare,
Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare
Hare
Rama,
Rama,
Rama, Hare Hare.
His Grace, Partha Prabhu and Uttama Mataji ki jai.
Jai,
Vaishnava Sangha ki jai.
Ki Jai.
Hare Krishna, Hare
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,
Hey, Loka.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare
Loka.